This Sunday on NBC5 In Depth, the race for Vermont's lieutenant governor down to two candidates who are familiar faces at the Vermont State House.
Well, I certainly liked being lieutenant governor and felt I was doing a lot of good. I thought I could do more. Obviously, that was not the right year for that.
David Zuckerman fighting for his old job back.
It's been made very clear to me that the position has become a revolving door. I don't want to see that happen.
And Joe Benning saying he's committed to be the second in command in Montpelier. Their pitch to voters ahead of November's general election. Here's NBC5 In Depth. Hello, I'm Alice King, and this is NBC5 In Depth. Two candidates going head-to-head in Vermont's race for lieutenant governor. That position open after incumbent Lieutenant Governor Molly Gray announced she was running for the open U.S. House seat. David Zuckerman, a Democrat and progressive, wants his old job back. Zuckerman winning the Democratic primary. He's a farmer from Heinsberg, Vermont, and he ran for governor in 2020 against Vermont Governor Phil Scott. He served as lieutenant governor from 2017 to 2021, and before that, he served as state senator representing the Chittenden district.
David Zuckerman, thanks so much for joining us for NBC5 In Depth, and congratulations on your primary win.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So you've had this job before, ran for governor, fell short. Why go back to wanting to become the lieutenant governor again?
Well, I certainly liked being lieutenant governor and felt I was doing a lot of good. I thought I could do more. Obviously, that was not the right year for that. But as lieutenant governor, I feel you could do a lot of work with citizens across the state, bringing their voices into the process. Frankly, I had a lot of people reach out to me last fall saying, we don't see someone with the urgency on economic injustice issues, climate action, and so forth that they wanted in that office. And so with that encouragement from many folks, I thought, well, if they felt I was doing a good job, they want that kind of message and standard bearer in that office. And with the transition in the Senate of 11 new senators, my experience will help create a smooth transition.
Let's talk a little bit about the lieutenant governor role. It's not a policy-making post.
Correct.
You hire a staff of one. You preside over the Senate during the 5-month session, and you break a tie vote, which rarely happens. Why do you want the role of lieutenant governor?
Well, I think the narrow and sort of factual definition of the office is true. However, one has a lot of time as lieutenant governor to do the work, to promote issues, to work with citizens across the state. I mean, just even in campaigning, what I'm hearing from people around housing crisis situation, cost of living between fuel and food, childcare crisis, healthcare costs spiraling out of control, and of course the climate, and now we're of course talking about reproductive liberty. All of these things are high on people's minds, and while the lieutenant governor does not specifically make the policy, that is true. The lieutenant governor has a role to play in committee assignments, which impacts the policy that's made, and as I did for 4 years, bringing more people into how to contact their legislator, how to influence the outcome. So it's not just lobbyists and it's not just insiders, but everyday people. So I've enjoyed that role in the past, and I look forward to doing it again.
Tell me your views on Prop 5, the abortion rights amendment to the Vermont Constitution.
Well, I'm 100% supportive. This is let me be very clear, abortion is health care. And this is a decision between an individual and their doctor. It is not government's role, it is not the neighbor's role, it is nobody else's role to tell people what they can and can't do with their body.
And one of the big issues that a lot of people are talking about is the housing issue. There's a housing crisis in Vermont. People cannot find anywhere to live or even afford to live. What is your solution to that?
Well, unfortunately, the solution is a long-term solution. There's no immediate solution. And this is a real difference between how I think and some of how maybe my opponent and others think, which is don't wait to address a problem when it's right in front of you. These issues have been building for quite some time, and we should have been investing in much more in affordable housing far sooner. We should have been investing far more in weatherizing our homes to make the homes that we do have more cost-effective and affordable from an energy perspective. That's been underfunded. Not only is that tough economically for people, that means we haven't been doing the environmental climate action we should be doing. But I would look at a lot of the short-term rentals. There are folks who have a single apartment and they're turning it to short-term rental to be able to make enough money to afford to live here, with folks who are vacationing here and so forth. But there's also a lot of long-term rentals, larger property owners who are shifting their properties to short-term rentals, really removing a huge housing segment from the market for renters and the working class. That's something I think we need to look into. We also are fortunate to have had the COVID money that the legislature and the governor applied to building thousands of units of affordable housing over the next couple of years. But we need to be thinking now about what happens when that money runs out, because I don't think that's going to be enough to solve the housing crunch. And so right now we need to be looking at what do we do to raise the revenue to keep building more affordable housing? What do we do to invest in town and village centers to create the infrastructure to make housing development more possible? That's sewerage, that's water. What do we do so that 3, 5, and 7 years out, we're already fixing the problem that we see coming, as well as that which is in front of us today?
Let's talk a little bit about gun violence. It's up across the state. For example, Burlington is seeing its highest number of gun incidents. Yeah. What do you think is the reason behind that?
Well, we're seeing gun violence and general crime concerns happening all over the country. So it's not specific to Burlington. It's not specific to certain communities in Vermont. So the first thing is to make sure we look at all of this in context and don't immediately come to a conclusion based on some short-term political gain. Secondly, we still obviously have to address the problem. The crime rates tend to go up when economic distress is greater, when mental health distress is greater. These, again, are culminating problems coming out of COVID, coming out of a lack of investment in support for people who, if we were to catch certain challenges earlier and help them get through that challenge and back on their feet sooner in life, they wouldn't be in the position today where some of these crimes are being committed for, whether it's economic distress due to substance abuse disorder, whether it's economic distress brought on by mental health issues, or mental health issues bringing on economic distress. If we just look at folks and say, boom, you're a criminal or you're a problem, let's lock you up, that's not going to solve the problem. There will be more people coming into that situation. We have to invest in, we talked about affordable housing, social workers, mental health counselors, which is an issue across the board. I have a daughter in high school, and there are a lot of high school students who could use a lot more counselors and support getting through some of the strife and challenges that they're facing today. We all went through those years. There is certainly teenage angst. We're not talking about that. Teenagers are growing up in a climate world that is very uncertain for their future. They're growing up in a democracy world that has some of the highest levels of discord and risk of losing our democracy. We have to resolve these things, or we will build more of these problems that could manifest in more criminal activity down the road.
A lot of people are dealing with staffing shortages across the board. How do we get workers into the workforce?
Well, yeah, there's multiple issues with the workforce. My own farm, we're shorthanded 2 people. So while campaigning statewide, I'm still working 50 and 60 hours a week, picking up the pieces and helping run the farm that I enjoy doing, but it's stressful, sometimes 70 hours. So it's a real issue. I get it viscerally, just in my own situation. I would say housing is a big one. I have one person on my campaign team whose housing situation is changing, looked for a long time, and stuff was too expensive and is going to work remotely for the last month of the campaign, unfortunately, and move back to where they came from. They want to live here. We have childcare is a huge issue. We've had incredible advocates, incredible research done about what our communities can look like, what our workforce gains can be if someone didn't have to stay home doing childcare because they either can't find childcare or it's too expensive. So the folks at Let's Grow Kids and others have looked at early child development, earlier education, and childcare. And I think that's a huge arena we need to tackle, like basically every other industrialized country in the world, to make sure folks have paid family and medical leave and childcare. Then we would have a much smoother workforce situation.
All right, let's talk a little bit about climate change. And, how do you strike the balance between the climate crisis and getting off fossil fuels?
Well, I think we've led the way in some respects with programs and policies that have been moving us in that direction faster than many other states that save people money and wean them off fossil fuels. If you look at weatherization, there's been a report for years now saying we should be weatherizing 10,000 homes a year. Unfortunately, we've only appropriated in state government under this governor and the legislature enough money for maybe 1,000 units a year, houses or apartment units. If we did that faster, many people's bills today would be smaller and more stable. We're going into the heating season. We know that fossil fuel is very volatile. It's gone through the roof. It's going back down a little bit right now. Electricity prices are far more stable and a far more efficient heat source. So that's a big one. Certainly in building homes, as we build these affordable homes and over the next couple of years, we have to make sure that that building environment includes building efficient homes that save people money. We have to look at, as the legislature did, incentivizing more purchases of renewable energy vehicles. And I get that many people can't afford that there's nothing requiring everybody to go buy them tomorrow. But if we can incentivize it and if we can make it more affordable for everyday people, more people will buy them. More people will transition to stable, lower cost transportation. So these are all opportunities that we have.
Final question. What do you have to say to the voters that did not vote for you in the primaries?
Well, I would say I'm greatly appreciative that all four candidates who ran for this office, including myself, came together at the Unity Rally to unite around the winners in the various races across the state, including my own. My opponents are supportive of my bid. I hope their supporters will listen to them and also call me, reach out. If there's an issue that you disagree with me on, let's talk about it. I think we agree on just about everything across the various candidates when it comes to the major issues of our day, the economic distress, climate, reproductive liberty, and so forth. So, I've been in difficult primaries before, and I think folks do come together around the common message, and I think that's what I bring to the table.
All right, David Zuckerman, thank you so much for joining us for NBC5 In Depth.
Absolutely. Thanks for the time.
Still ahead on NBC5 In Depth, meet Zuckerman's Republican challenger, Joe Benning. What he says he'll do differently if elected. Welcome back to NBC5 In Depth. We continue our commitment coverage of Vermont's lieutenant governor race. Joe Benning winning the GOP primary for lieutenant governor. He's an attorney from Lyndonville, Vermont, and a 12-year veteran of the state Senate representing the Caledonia district.
Well, Joe Benning, thank you so much for joining us for NBC5 In Depth, and congratulations on your primary win.
Thanks for having me.
This position is not a policy-making position. You hire a staff of one, and you preside over the Senate during the 5-month session. So why did you decide that you wanted to run for lieutenant governor?
Well, first off, I've been a member of the Senate for 12 years now. I've seen several lieutenant governors come and go. We are literally coming out of COVID-19, which I classify certainly as the most difficult time period for the Senate in my career there, but I would wager probably the most difficult time for the Senate since it was formed in 1836. That time period made me realize that there is institutional knowledge that I have possession of after being there for so long, and that it would be a valuable tool to bring to the position of lieutenant governor. Not only do you moderate the Senate, but you are actually part of a committee of 3 that appoints people to their respective chairs on committee assignments, as well as every senator, they have to be appointed to a committee. I know those people. I know them fairly well. We've worked very hard through COVID-19 together, and I think I have a good handle on who should be appointed to what committees. And most importantly, if something should happen to the governor, I would be stepping into the governor's role. And I'm very close to Phil Scott. I've worked with his campaign team. I've worked with his administrative team as both Senate Minority Leader and as Chair of Institutions. You put all that together, and I figured out I was probably a really good fit for the office of Lieutenant Governor.
Let's talk a little bit about some issues that are going to be coming up. Tell me your views on Prop 5, the Abortion Rights Amendment to the Vermont Constitution.
I voted for it. I will vote for it again come November. But let me pause to note that with respect to the Lieutenant Governor's position, we can't legislate. We can't draft a bill. As a Lieutenant Governor, you can't go into a committee and argue for a bill. You are in facing all policy. The closest you can get to having a vote is if there's a tie in the Senate, in which case you'd break that tie vote. But as far as Prop 5 is concerned, I voted for it a couple of years ago when it was drafted, and I plan on voting for it again come November.
Vermont's housing crisis, it seems like people can't afford to live here. We're having a hard time recruiting people. Do you have a solution to address that problem?
I'm going to come back a half a step and say again that as Lieutenant Governor, you don't have a hand in drafting corrective measures for that. But let me point out that over the past 2 years, with all of the money we have received from the federal government for COVID, we have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this very subject, many of the plans of which are not yet in the pipeline. So we have technically addressed the problem. We are waiting for projects to come to fruition. We're waiting for shovel-ready projects for which that money will be spent, but it has already been designated. It's just a question now of making sure the designated money stays focused in trying to correct that problem for a housing shortage. Your question also brings up, however, the issue of labor shortage. That is a severe problem in this state, and it works not just from other workers who might come to a place like this institution to work. It also means those people who are running construction companies are going to have a hard time finding the laborers to build the very housing we have now targeted for construction. You don't magically wave a wand and have that cured, because this is at least a New England-wide problem and probably the United States problem. The worker shortage is something that we have to pay attention to and understand that projects are going to take a while to build. It really is a rock and a hard place argument to make. That's not to say the Lieutenant Governor should simply blow off the issue. In fact, the Lieutenant Governor should be out there campaigning left and right to make Vermont look like a great place to live, work, and play, and invite people from out of state to come here and take over those roles.
I'm going to ask you a couple more issue-related questions. Let's talk about gun violence. It's up across the state. Specifically in Burlington, they've seen the most gunfire incidents so far this year. What do you think is the reason behind that?
Our opioid crisis is driving the conversation. Every gun shooting that I have heard about recently has something to do with a bad drug transaction or people who are coming from out of state and getting involved in the more serious criminal issues in the state. I've been a criminal defense attorney for 40 years. I've watched what has been going on in the state from the inside, in other words, the court system. And I can tell you that virtually every criminogenic related issue is somehow related to the opioid crisis. And we have got to pay attention to that and deal with it.
How do you strike the balance between the climate crisis and getting off of fossil fuels?
Let me start by saying I don't believe this is a state issue, and one of the mistakes we could make as a small state of 640,000 people with a very small revenue stream is to try to tackle an issue that is national in scope. I've had problems with certain aspects of the climate change initiatives that we appear to be grasping for more than we can actually chew. So to tell you as a politician that I'm going to solve the climate crisis by X, Y, or Z would be very disingenuous from the perspective of the Lieutenant Governor's position. I can certainly talk about it, but as I said earlier, I can't legislate about it. The issue, if you're going to really tackle climate change, can't be limited to the confines of the state of Vermont. It just doesn't make any sense. And if we're trying to pretend that we can lead the charge, that doesn't make any sense either. Vermont, for instance, cannot tell Toyota, Ford, General Motors that they have to have vehicles that are all electric by X date. If we try to tell them that, absolutely useless exercise in futility. We don't want to hobble ourselves either by saying you can't own a gas-powered vehicle within these confines, because that's just going to drive more of the people out of state that don't want to abide by that provision. This has to be a national conversation.
Do you think that it hurts or helps to have the governor and lieutenant governor be on the same party?
I don't think the party makes a big difference. I do, however, look at my race and understand there's a very clear difference between myself and my opponent with respect to the next governor. And let me start by saying I firmly believe the next governor will be Phil Scott. I just have to believe that's going to be the case. I personally have known Phil Scott for at least 12 years now. I've worked with not only his campaign team, but his administrative team. And going forward, I'm going to do the exact same thing I've been doing for the past 12 years, helping to shepherd legislation through the building in any way I can as lieutenant governor. I've worked with the administrative team both as Senate Minority Leader and as the chair of Senate institutions. So by using a quick example, if you follow Route 15 right now from one end to the other, you're going to be coming across various infrastructure projects that came through the Capitol bill in the Senate Institutions Committee. That initiative to have all of those infrastructure projects to build the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, a wonderful recreational opportunity, that initiative was prompted by Phil Scott, and I helped shepherd that legislation through the Senate Institutions Committee. So those projects are all being done on a time frame that expects it to be completed in November. That's the positive thing that I bring to this particular question. My opponent, on the other hand, has not exactly been welcomed into the Scott administration. There has been conflict in the past. David ran against Phil Scott. David Zuckerman obviously ran against Phil Scott a couple of years ago, which tells you that they're not in sync with each other. And on primary night, he announced to his supporters that he was going back to Montpelier to get rid of, these are his words, that hump that was in his way, meaning Phil Scott. So you now have a choice in this particular race. Are you going to vote for somebody who's actually in sync with and can help out Phil Scott, or are you voting for somebody who is going to be in conflict with Phil Scott? And I don't think party makes any difference whatsoever.
Last question. What do you have to say to the voters who did not vote for you on primary night?
I say to them, I understand frustrations, and I understand in a primary battle a lot of hard things get said, as they do normally in a general election. But when you deal with issues on the primary side of things, you're really focusing on a narrow group of individuals who are concerned about certain things, but it's not the broad perspective equation. It's a group of people who are certainly narrowly focused in how they want to react at the party level. I understand that there were people who are frustrated with me about things that I take positions on, but at the end of the day, we all have 5 core values in common. We believe in a free market economy. We believe in the right of someone to have individual liberty, to have personal responsibility. We believe in an educational system that enables all of our graduates to compete in a global marketplace. And we wrap all those things together in what's known as the state constitution. All Republicans are in agreement on those things. And even though we disagree on certain social issues that may be outside of those things, at the end of the day, I'm hoping that they will come back together and remember we have a common goal and objective, and I represent that goal in this particular general election.
All right, Joe Benning, thanks so much for joining us for NBC5 in Depth.
Thanks for having me.
The November general election is November 8th, and NBC5 is your home for Commitment 2022 coverage. For voter information, head over to our website, mynbc5.com, or you can download our mobile app.